I thought I was helping when I reconnected my elderly patient with her estranged sister until I found out her family had tried to take her life. So we gave them a taste of justice they'd never recover from. There was a woman, Naya, in her 90s who stayed with us for a while due to her husband being unable to take care of her. I took a liking to her straight away because we had a lot in common. For one, she was the only black woman in the area. I live in Maine, and she was always down to chat. Nia used to tell me stories about how back in the day, she and her husband were put through hell for being a mixed-race couple. But even when his parents disowned him and he got fired from his job, he said loving her would always be worth it. Honestly, she was my favorite part of the job, especially when her husband Tom came in, because together, they'd reminisce about experiences they'd shared in their 75 years of marriage, or more specifically, how worth it had all been. And they always convinced me to never settle. It was the definition of a silver lining. But then Tom did something that ripped my heart out of my chest and crushed it. He called her sister. Hey ma'am, I don't know if you remember me, but your sister Nia needs you, and it'd be nice if you could. They hung up before he could finish, and when they did, he didn't even seem surprised. He just looked sad and stared at the ground. I guess his family wasn't the only one to disown him for being in a mixed-race marriage. A day later, Nia was finally able to see people again. Her vitals looked awful, and no one thought she'd wake back up. I was honestly already wondering when her funeral date would be planned for. That's when I saw the husband hobble in through our emergency entrance. I told him she wasn't waking up, but he just looked at me and said, "That's because she hasn't heard my voice yet." As soon as he said her name, my heart beat out of my chest, because her eyes slowly opened. She kissed him on the cheek, and his face went all red like it was the first time. When Nia gained more consciousness, she started to speak. "Did you call my sister?" When he nodded, a tear fell down her cheek. I wanted to hug her until she couldn't breathe, but mostly I was angry. I mean, imagine having such a huge grudge that you don't visit your sister in hospital, all over a mixed-race relationship. Well, I wasn't having it. As Tom fell asleep beside Nia, I stole his phone and called her number on my phone. "Hello," I announced in a customer service way. "Your sister is alone in the hospital. We're wondering if you're her next choice of contact." Is that a Nigerian accent I hear? Her voice was low, skeptical. I told her yes, and proceeded to fake gush with her for 5 minutes over what an amazing country it is. I've still never been. And turns out, that was one of the best decisions I'd ever made, because she ended up actually coming. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe some cartoonish reunion where Nia runs over to her and they jump up and down, or an ingle tear falling from her cheek as she whispers, "I'm sorry." But either way, none of that happened. The second she saw Tom, she lost it. What the F if I knew he was here, I wouldn't have come. My heart dropped. Nia turned to look at me, wondering what the F was going on, how her sister knew where they were. But before I could explain, they started to argue. "You spent your entire life ruining the bloodline, and now you'll die ruining the bloodline." Her sister's words were sharp, but Nia was sharper. "Oh, I'm sorry we can't all be a miserable piece of crap like you. How did you even get here? Your boyfriend drove?" "Oh, wait." She then laughed like she was 18 again. "You know, Faith, you're such a drag that you still don't have a boyfriend. And instead of finding one, you came to find me and yell at me for having what you don't. You're effing pathetic." Something broke that day. You could feel it in the air. And Nia became more assertive, more confident. I thought I had finally helped to heal her, but I was wrong. So undubitably, inexplicitly wrong. And when Nia came back for her little revenge plot, our lives were changed. Forever. The next morning, I was sorting medication in the nurse's station when Tom arrived for his daily visit. He looked better than he had in weeks. Clean-shaven, wearing a freshly pressed shirt, and carrying a small bouquet of daisies. I waved as he passed, but he barely acknowledged me. That was odd. Tom usually stopped to chat, asking about my day, or sharing some small story about Nia. I finished my tasks and decided to check on them. As I approached Nia's room, I heard raised voices. I slowed my steps, not wanting to interrupt what sounded like an argument. "I don't care what you think you heard," Tom was saying, his voice uncharacteristically stern. "This isn't right, Nia. These people care about you." "Care about me?" Nia scoffed. "They don't know the first thing about me, about us, about what we've been through." I leaned closer to the partially open door, straining to hear more. "That girl Jamie," Nia continued, sticking her nose where it doesn't belong, calling Faith. "Who does she think she is?" My stomach dropped. So that's what this was about. She was angry that I'd called her sister. She was trying to help, Tom said softly. She thought she was doing the right thing. "Well, she wasn't," Nia snapped. "And now Faith knows where we are. Do you understand what that means? After all these years of keeping our distance, keeping safe? From what?" I frowned, trying to make sense of her words. "Nia, that was a lifetime ago," Tom sighed. "Faith is almost 90. What do you think she's going to do?" There was a long silence, and then Nia spoke again, her voice so low I almost missed it. "It's not Faith I'm worried about. It's who she might tell." I backed away from the door, my mind racing. What was Nia afraid of? Who might Faith tell? None of this made sense. The Nia I knew was a sweet old lady who loved to share stories about her life with Tom. This secretive, paranoid woman was a stranger to me. Over the next few days, I tried to act normal around Nia, but it was hard. She watched me constantly, her eyes following me around the room whenever I came in to check on her. The warm conversations we used to have were replaced by terse exchanges about her medication or meals. She stopped asking about my life, stopped sharing stories about hers. It was like a wall had gone up between us. Tom still visited every day, but he seemed different too. Tense, worried. I often caught him glancing at his phone, as if expecting a call that never came. Once I saw him arguing with Nia in hushed tones, both of them going silent the moment I entered the room. A week after Nia's return, I was working a late shift when I noticed her light was still on well past midnight. I knocked softly and pushed the door open to find her sitting up in bed, writing in that notebook again. "Everything okay, Nia?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Need anything before I finish my rounds?" She snapped the notebook shut and slid it under her pillow. "I'm fine," she said curtly. Then, after a pause, her expression softened slightly. "Actually, Jamie, there is something you could do for me." My heart lifted a little. Maybe she was finally warming up to me again. "Of course," I said, stepping further into the room. What do you need? My sister Faith left something for me at the hospital, a small box. Tom forgot to pick it up when we left. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Would you be a dear and get it for me tomorrow? I'd ask Tom, but his arthritis is acting up, and I had to make him drive all that way. I hesitated. Something felt off about this request. I can check with the hospital, but usually they mail forgotten items to patients. No, Naya said quickly. It's personal. Family heirloom. I'd feel better if someone I trust picked it up directly. She reached out and patted my hand. Please, Jamie? For me? The way she said for me reminded me of the old Nia, the one who used to share pudding cups with me and tell me stories about her life with Tom. I found myself nodding. Great, she said, her smile widening. Just ask for Dr. Patel. He knows about it. Dr. Patel? The same doctor she'd been trying to set me up with? I felt my cheeks warm at the memory. I'll try to go tomorrow after my shift, I promised. The next day, I drove to Maine Medical Center, still unsure about what I was doing. Why would Faith leave something for Nia? They hadn't spoken in decades until that disastrous hospital visit. And why would Dr. Patel be involved? At the hospital, I asked for Dr. Patel at the reception desk. The receptionist looked confused. Dr. Patel? He doesn't work here anymore. Left about 2 weeks ago for a position in Boston. My blood ran cold. Are you sure? He was treating a patient named Nia Johnson recently. The receptionist typed something into her computer. No, doctor. Patel wasn't assigned to Mrs. Johnson. Dr. Rivera was her attending physician. I thanked her and walked away, my mind racing. Nia had lied to me. But why? What was in this supposed box? And why send me on a wild goose chase to find it? I was about to leave when I spotted a familiar face. Dakota, one of the nurses who had cared for Nia during her stay. I waved her down. Hey, Jamie, right? Dakota smiled. How's Mrs. Johnson doing? She was quite the fighter. She's different, I admitted. Actually, I'm here because she asked me to pick up the box her sister supposedly left for her. Did you see anything like that? Dakota's brow furrowed. Her sister? The one who showed up yelling? No, she didn't leave anything that I know of. Dakota paused, looking thoughtful. Actually, Faith did come back a couple of days later. They talked for quite a while. I overheard Faith telling Nia something about her nephew, George Jr., I think his name was. Sounded like she was warning Nia about him. This surprised me. Faith came back? Nia never mentioned that. Yeah, it was a much calmer visit. Still tense, but they weren't screaming at each other. Faith seemed concerned, almost. Dakota checked her watch. Sorry, I've got to get back to my patients. Hope you find what you're looking for. I thanked her and headed back to my car, processing this new information. So Faith had returned for a second, more civil visit, one that Nia had kept secret. And there was a nephew involved somehow. On the drive back to Pine Meadows, I couldn't stop thinking about Nia's behavior. The secretive phone calls, the notebook, the lies about the box, and Dr. Patel. None of it made sense. The Nia I thought I knew wouldn't do these things. But then again, maybe I never really knew her at all. When I arrived back at the nursing home, I went straight to Nia's room to confront her about the wild goose chase she'd sent me on. But her room was empty, the bed was made, and Tom sat alone in the visitor's chair, staring out the window. Tom? Where's Nia? I asked, looking around as if she might be hiding somewhere. He turned to me, his eyes red-rimmed and tired. Physical therapy. She'll be back soon. He paused, studying my face. You didn't find any box, did you? I blinked in surprise. How did you know about that? Because she's been sending people on errands like that all week. He sighed. The maintenance man, one of the kitchen staff, even Richard from down the hall, all looking for things that don't exist. I sat down in the chair opposite him. Tom, what's going on? Nia's been acting strange ever since she came back from the hospital. Tom was quiet for a long moment, his gaze returning to the window. It's Faith, he finally said. Seeing her again, it brought everything back. All the old pain, the old fears. He looked back at me. You have to understand, Jamie. When Nia and I got married, we lost more than just our families. We lost our safety. What do you mean? I asked, leaning forward. It was 1949. A black woman and a white man getting married wasn't just frowned upon. It was dangerous. We received threats. Our apartment was vandalized. Someone tried to burn our car. His hands trembled slightly as he spoke. Faith's husband was the worst. He was involved with some nasty people back then, threatened to teach us a lesson more than once. I felt a chill run down my spine. But that was over 70 years ago. Haiti doesn't die easily, Tom said quietly. We moved away, changed our phone number. Eventually, the threats stopped. We built a life together, had our son. But Nia never forgot, never fully felt safe. He sighed deeply. When Faith showed up at the hospital, it all came flooding back for Nia. She's convinced that Faith will tell her son, our nephew, where we are, that he'll come to finish what his father started. But that's crazy, I said. You're both in your 90s. Surely no one is holding a grudge after all this time. That's what I keep telling her, Tom agreed. But Nia, she's always been stubborn. And now she's got it in her head that she needs to protect us, to get even before they can hurt us again. Before I could ask what he meant by get even, the door opened and Nia rolled in her wheelchair, accompanied by Quinn from physical therapy. Her face darkened when she saw me. Thank you, Quinn, she said dismissively. I can take it from here. Quinn nodded and left, giving me a curious glance as he passed. As soon as the door closed, Nia turned to me. You didn't find the box, she stated flatly. There was no box, Nia, I said gently. Dr. Patel doesn't even work at that hospital anymore. She waved her hand dismissively. Minor mistake. I meant Dr. Rivera. Nia, Tom said, his voice tired. Stop this. Jamie is trying to help. She's your friend. Friend? Nia scoffed. She called Faith, brought all this down on us. All what? I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. Nothing has happened, Nia. No one is coming after you. You don't know that, she snapped. Her eyes narrowed. Why are you really here, Jamie? Who sent you? I stared at her in disbelief. No one sent me. I work here, remember? I've been taking care of you for months. Convenient, she muttered. Very convenient. Tom stood up with a sigh. I think we all need some time to cool down. Jamie, would you mind giving us a few minutes alone? I nodded and left the room, my head spinning. Outside in the hallway, I leaned against the wall and tried to make sense of what was happening. Was Naya suffering from paranoid delusions? Should I talk to her doctor? But what if Tom was right, and this was just her way of processing the trauma of seeing her sister again? I was so lost in thought that I didn't notice Richard approaching until he was right beside me. That old lady's up to something, he said gruffly. I jumped slightly. Richard rarely spoke to anyone, preferring to stay in his room watching old Western movies on his small TV. What do you mean? I asked. She had me looking for a package at the post office yesterday, said it was important. When I told her there wasn't anything, she got all suspicious, asking if anyone had followed me. He shook his head. Then this morning, I saw her talking to that new orderly. Joseph, I think his name is. Giving him money. Money? For what? Richard shrugged. Don't know, but it didn't look right. I thanked him and immediately went looking for Joseph. I found him in the supply closet, restocking paper towels. Hey, Joseph, I said casually. How's it going with the new job? Joseph was young, maybe early 20s, with a nervous energy about him. He jumped slightly when I spoke. Fine, he said quickly. Everything's fine. Good to hear. Listen, I noticed you were talking to Mrs. Johnson earlier. Nia, everything okay with her? His eyes darted around, not meeting mine. Yeah, sure. She's nice. Gives good tips. Tips? I raised an eyebrow. For what? Joseph fidgeted with the paper towels. Just, bringing her extra stuff. Snacks and things. I didn't believe him for a second. Joseph, if a resident is asking you to do something that makes you uncomfortable, you should tell someone. He finally looked at me. It's not a big deal. She just wanted me to mail some letters for her. Said she didn't trust the nursing home mail system. Letters to who? I don't know. The envelopes were already sealed. He hesitated. But one of them fell open when I was putting it in the mailbox. It had a bunch of old photos in it, and a note that said something like, "Remember what you did to us? I haven't forgotten." My blood ran cold. Do you remember the address? Joseph shook his head. No, but it was somewhere in Boston. Boston, where Faith lived, where Dr. Patel had supposedly moved to. This couldn't be a coincidence. I spent the rest of my shift watching Nia from a distance. She seemed calmer now, sitting with Tom in the common room, playing cards with some of the other residents. But occasionally, I'd catch her glancing at the entrance, as if expecting someone. And once, when the front door opened and a delivery man walked in, her whole body tensed until she saw who it was. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Tom had said, about the threats they'd received all those years ago, about Nia feeling like she needed to get even. What exactly was she planning? And how far would she go? The next morning, I arrived at work early, determined to get to the bottom of this. I checked the visitor log from the past week and noticed something odd. Faith's name, signed in 3 days ago. This confirmed what Dakota had told me. Faith had been back to visit Nia since their hospital confrontation. I found Mary, the receptionist who had been working that day. Do you remember a woman named Faith signing in on Tuesday? I asked, pointing to the log. Mary adjusted her glasses and peered at the signature. Oh yes, older lady. Very well dressed. Said she was Mrs. Johnson's sister. How did she seem? Were they arguing? Mary shook her head. Not at all. They seemed tense at first. But when Faith left a couple hours later, they were actually hugging. Quite a change from what I heard about their hospital reunion. This was getting more confusing. If Faith and Nia had reconciled somewhat, why was Nia still so paranoid? What wasn't she telling me? I thanked Mary and headed straight to Nia's room. She was alone, Tom having gone to a doctor's appointment of his own. Perfect. Good morning, Nia, I said cheerfully, checking her vitals as usual. Sleep well? She nodded, watching me warily. Well enough. I made small talk as I worked, asking about her breakfast, commenting on the weather. Then, as casually as I could, I said, I heard your sister visited the other day. That must have been nice. Nia's expression didn't change, but her hand tightened. On the blanket. Who told you that? It's in the visitor log, I said, keeping my voice light. Tuesday afternoon. Nia was quiet for a moment, then sighed. Yes. Faith came to see me. We had some things to discuss. That's good, I said, encouraged by her honesty. Family reconciliations are always nice. It wasn't exactly a reconciliation, Nia said, her voice hardening. Faith came to warn me about her son, George Jr. I frowned slightly. Warn you about what? Nia studied me for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. Sit down, Jamie. It's time you heard the real story. I sat in the chair beside her bed, my heart pounding. Tom told you about the threats we received when we got married, she began. What he didn't tell you is that they weren't just threats. Faith's husband, George, and his friends attacked Tom one night when he was walking home from work. Hit him so badly he was in the hospital for a week. I gasped. That's terrible. It gets worse, Nia continued, her voice steady but her eyes blazing with old anger. When Tom got out of the hospital, we decided to leave Boston, start fresh somewhere else. But the night before we were supposed to leave, someone broke into our apartment. I was alone. Tom was picking up our bus tickets. She paused, her hands trembling slightly. It was George and 2 other men. They said they were going to teach me a lesson for corrupting a white man. My stomach turned. I could guess what kind of lesson they had in mind. I fought back, Nia said, a hint of pride in her voice. Had a kitchen knife, managed to slash George's face before they could do what they came to do. They ran off when the neighbors started banging on the door. Nia, I'm so sorry, I whispered. We left that night, she continued. Didn't wait for morning. Moved to New York, then Chicago, then finally here to Maine. Changed our names a few times along the way. Thought we'd finally outrun our past. She looked at me, her eyes hard. Then you called Faith, and now they know where we are. They? I asked, confused. George must be long dead by now. His son isn't, Nia said flatly. George Jr. He's in his 70s now, but he's his father's son in every way. Faith told me all about him when she visited on Tuesday. I frowned. But if Faith came to warn you, doesn't that mean she's on your side now? Faith has always been complicated, Nia explained. She hated our marriage, but she also feared her husband. After what George did to me, Faith started to see him differently. When he called himself a year after we left Boston, she was actually actually relieved. He called himself? I repeated, trying to keep up. Couldn't live with the shame of being bested by a black woman. At least that's what Faith says. Junior grew up hearing all about the person war who drove his father to S-side. She said the slur without flinching, but I winced. He's been obsessed with finding us ever since. And now, thanks to you, he knows exactly where we are. My mind was reeling. If what Nia was saying was true, then her paranoia wasn't paranoia at all. It was a legitimate fear based on a lifetime of trauma. What were in those letters you sent? I asked, dreading the answer. Insurance, Nia said cryptically, in case Junior decides to pay us a visit. Before I could ask what she meant, there was a knock at the door. Tom entered, looking tired from his appointment. Jamie, he said, nodding to me. Everything okay here? I stood up, forcing a smile. Just checking on Nia's medication. I'll leave you two alone. As I left the room, my mind was spinning with everything Nia had told me. Was it true? Or was this another one of her manipulations? I needed to find out more about this George Jr. before I decided what to do next. During my lunch break, I used the computer at the nurse's station to search for information about George Miller, Faith's husband. It didn't take long to find his obituary from 1950, confirming that he had indeed died by S-side, leaving behind a wife and infant son. Further searching revealed that George Miller Jr. had followed in his father's footsteps, joining the same fraternal organization, and eventually becoming its president. There were several newspaper articles about his charitable work in Boston, complete with photos of an imposing man with cold eyes and a permanent scowl. What caught my attention, though, was a more recent article about Miller Jr.'s retirement from the organization. The piece mentioned that he was looking forward to settling old family business and righting historical wrongs. The phrasing sent a chill down my spine. I was so engrossed in my research that I didn't notice Joseph until he tapped me on the shoulder, making me jump. Sorry, he said quickly, but I thought you should know. That old lady, Mrs. Johnson, she gave me another letter to mail today. This one had a local address. My heart skipped a hit. Did you see what it was? Joseph nodded, looking uncomfortable. It was addressed to the police department, and it had evidence written across the front in big letters. Evidence? Of what? What was Nia planning? I thanked Joseph and hurried back to Nia's room, but she and Tom were gone. A quick check with the staff revealed they had gone to the garden for some fresh air. I found them sitting on a bench near the rose bushes, Tom reading aloud from a book while Nia gazed out at the flowers. Nia, can I talk to you for a minute? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Alone? Tom looked up, surprised. Is everything okay? Just need to ask about her medication. I lied smoothly. Won't take long. Tom nodded and stood up, his joints cracking audibly. I'll go get us some tea from the cafeteria. Once he was out of earshot, I turned to Nia. What evidence did you send to the police? Her eyebrows shut up. My, you have been busy. Nia, please. If you're in danger, let me help you. The proper way, through the authorities. She laughed. The authorities? Do you think they cared when a black woman was almost robbed in 1949? Do you think they'll care now, when two old people claim they're being threatened by a respected community leader over something that happened 7 decades ago? She had a point. But still, whatever she was planning couldn't be good. What did you send them, Nia? I pressed. She studied me for a long moment, then sighed. George's confession. Confession? I repeated, confused. Before he called himself, George wrote a detailed confession of everything he'd done. The attack on Tom, the break-in at our apartment, and other crimes I won't mention. He gave it to Faith for safekeeping, thinking she'd destroy it to protect his memory. But Faith kept it all these years, her own insurance policy against Junior, who apparently inherited his father's violent tendencies. I frowned. But why would Faith give it to you now? Because Junior has been getting worse, more obsessed. Faith is afraid of him, afraid of what he might do. She came here to warn me, yes, but also to give me the means to protect myself if necessary. Nia's eyes were clear and sharp. The confession is just a copy. I have the original hidden away. If Junior comes for us, I'll make sure the world knows exactly what kind of monster his father was, and what kind of monster he is. It was a clever plan, but something still didn't add up. What about the photos you sent? Joseph said one of the envelopes had old photos in it. Nia's expression darkened. Those weren't for the police. Those were for Junior. A reminder of what his father did, what he tried to do to me. I felt sick. You're trying to provoke him. I'm trying to warn him, Nia corrected. Stay away, or face the consequences. Before I could respond, Tom returned with 2 cups of tea. The conversation was over, but my worries were just beginning. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept thinking about Nia's plan, about the danger she might be putting herself and Tom in. If Junior was as obsessed and volatile as she claimed, sending him those photos might not scare him off. It might enrage him further. I decided to call in sick the next day and drive to Boston. I needed to see this George Miller Jr. for myself, to gauge whether he was really the threat Nia believed him to be. It was a 4-hour drive, but I was on the road by 6 a.m., fueled by coffee and determination. Finding Miller's address wasn't difficult. He was listed in the phone book, his home address right there for anyone to see. It was a large Victorian house in one of Boston's more affluent neighborhoods, well-maintained with a manicured lawn and expensive car in the driveway. I parked across the street and watched the house, not sure what I was looking for. After about an hour, the front door opened and an elderly man emerged. He was tall and broad-shouldered despite his age, with a full head of white hair and the same scowling expression I'd seen in the newspaper photos. He got into the car and drove away, and I impulsively decided to follow him. He drove to a small cafe in downtown Boston, where he met another elderly man for what appeared to be a regular breakfast meeting. They sat by the window, giving me a clear view of their conversation. Miller seemed animated, gesturing emphatically while his companion nodded along. After they finished eating, Miller's friend left, but Miller remained at the table, pulling out what looked like a map. He studied it intently, occasionally making notes on a small pad beside him. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call, his expression darkening as he spoke. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but his body language was clear. He was angry, determined. When he hung up, he gathered his things and left the cafe, walking briskly despite his age. I followed him to a travel agency, where he spent about 20 minutes inside. When he emerged, he was holding a folder that looked like travel documents. My stomach dropped. Was he planning a trip to Maine? I'd seen enough. I needed to get back to Pine Meadows and warn Nia and Tom. But as I turned to head back to my car, I collided with someone walking behind me. "I'm so sorry," I started to say, then froze. It was the man who had been having breakfast with Miller. He studied my face, his eyes narrowing. "You've been following George," he said. It wasn't a question. "I don't know what you're talking about," I stammered, trying to step around him. He blocked my path. "I saw you at the cafe, then again outside the travel agency. What's your interest in George Miller?" I thought quickly. "I'm a journalist," I lied, "working on a piece about community leaders in Boston." The man didn't look convinced. "George doesn't talk to journalists. Not since that hit piece about his father last year." "Hit piece? What hit piece?" I asked before I could stop myself. The man's eyes narrowed further. The one claiming George Sr. was some kind of violent racist. Bunch of lies from some old black couple out in Maine. Nearly called George with the stress of it all. My blood ran cold. So Nia had already made a move against Junior, even before sending the confession and photos. No wonder she was worried about retaliation. "Look, I really need to go," I said, trying again to step around him. This time he let me pass, but called after me. "You tell whoever sent you that George isn't going to take this lying down. He's going to set the record straight." I practically ran back to my car, my heart pounding. I needed to get back to Pine Meadows and fast. The drive back to Maine felt endless. I tried calling the nursing home several times but couldn't get through, unusual for the middle of the day. When I finally arrived, the parking lot was full of unfamiliar cars, including a police cruiser. My heart sank. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Staff members huddled in small groups, speaking in hushed tones. I spotted Linda at the nurse's station and hurried over. "What's going on?" I asked, breathless from rushing in. Linda looked at me with wide eyes. "Where have you been? We've been trying to reach you all day." "I was out," I said vaguely. "What happened?" "It's Nia," Linda said, lowering her voice. "Someone broke into her room last night, ransacked the place looking for something. Tom tried to stop them and got pushed, broke his hip when he fell. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Is he okay? Where's Nia?" "Tom's at the hospital." "Nia's fine. She was in the bathroom when it happened. Locked herself in until help came." Linda shook her head. "The police are with her now," taking her statement. I thanked Linda and rushed to Nia's room. The door was open, and inside I could see Nia sitting in her chair, talking to a police officer. The room was a mess. Drawers pulled out, belongings scattered across the floor, the mattress half off the bed. I waited until the officer left before entering. Nia looked up at me, her expression unreadable. "Where were you?" she asked flatly. "Boston," I admitted. "I went to see Junior for myself." Her eyes widened slightly. And he knows about you and Tom. He knows you're in Maine, and he's planning something. I saw him at a travel agency, getting what looked like plane tickets or bus tickets." Nia nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she already suspected. "He came here last night, looking for the original confession." "How do you know it was him?" "I saw him," Nia said simply. "I was in the bathroom when I heard someone in the room. I peeked out and saw him going through my things. When Tom came in and confronted him, Junior pushed him hard. Tom fell." Her voice broke slightly. "By the time I got help, Junior was gone." I sat down heavily on the edge of the destroyed bed. "We need to tell the police everything. About the confession, about Junior's vendetta against you." Nia shook her head. "I already tried. They think it's just a random burglary, or that I'm a confused old lady making up stories." She looked at me, her eyes hard. "But I'm not confused, Jamie. I know exactly what's happening, and I know what I need to do." "What are you planning, Nia?" I asked, suddenly afraid of her answer. "Justice," she said simply. "After all these years, justice." Before I could press her further, a nurse came in to tell Nia that she was being moved to a different room while hers was cleaned up and secured with a new lock. I helped gather what belongings hadn't been destroyed, and followed as they wheeled her down the hall to a temporary room near the nurse's station. Once she was settled, I went to the hospital to check on Tom. He was groggy from pain medication but conscious. His face lit up when he saw me. "Jamie," he said weakly. "Good to see you." I sat beside his bed and took his hand. "I'm so sorry this happened, Tom. How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck." He chuckled, then winced. "How's Nia?" "She's okay. Shaken up, but okay." I hesitated, then added, "Tom, I know about Junior. About what happened in Boston all those years ago." Tom's expression grew serious. "Then you understand why we need to be careful. Junior isn't just angry. He's dangerous. Always has been." Nia mentioned something about justice, I said carefully. "What did she mean by that?" Tom sighed, closing his eyes briefly. "Nia's been carrying this anger for 70 years, Jamie. Anger at what was done to us, at the justice we never received. When Faith showed up at the hospital, it all came flooding back." He opened his eyes, looking at me intently. "You have to understand. In Nia's mind, this isn't just about protecting us now. It's about finally setting things right. But what is she planning to do?" I pressed. Tom shook his head slightly. "I don't know exactly. She won't tell me. Says it's better if I don't know the details." His expression was troubled. "But whatever it is, I'm afraid it might put her in danger." I squeezed his hand. "I'll keep an eye on her, Tom. I promise." When I returned to Pine Meadows that evening, Nia was asleep in her temporary room. I checked on her briefly, then went to the nurse's station to update her chart with notes from my visit with Tom. As I was writing, Joseph approached, looking nervous. "Hey," he said quietly. "I thought you should know. Mrs. Johnson asked me to mail another letter today, to that same address in Boston." My heart sank. "Did you do it?" He nodded. "She was pretty insistent, and after what happened last night, I didn't want to upset her more." "What was in it?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. "I don't know for sure," Joseph said, "but it looked like newspaper clippings, and there was something else, a small key." "A key? To what?" I thanked Joseph and went back to check on Nia, but she was still sleeping soundly, or at least pretending to be. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was setting something in motion, something that might have dangerous consequences for everyone involved. The next morning, I arrived early for my shift, determined to have a serious talk with Nia. But when I reached her temporary room, she wasn't there. The bed was made, her few belongings neatly arranged, but no Nia. I checked the dining room, the common areas, even the garden, but she was nowhere to be found. Finally, I asked Linda if she'd seen her. "Oh, she left about an hour ago," Linda said casually. "Her sister came to pick her up, said they were going to visit Tom at the hospital." I froze. Her sister? Faith? Linda nodded. "Nice lady, very well dressed. Said they'd be back by lunchtime." But I knew they wouldn't be. Nia wasn't going to the hospital to visit Tom. She was going to Boston to confront Junior, and Faith, who had gradually shifted from enemy to ally, was helping her. I rushed out to the parking lot, hoping to catch them before they left, but it was too late. I pulled out my phone to call the police, then hesitated. What would I tell them? That a 93-year-old woman had voluntarily left with her sister? They'd laugh me off the phone. No, I needed to handle this myself. I needed to get to Boston before Nia did something she couldn't take back. I called the hospital and asked to be connected to Tom's room. When he answered, I quickly explained the situation. "She's gone to confront him," Tom said, his voice tight with worry. "She's been planning this ever since Faith visited her at the hospital." "Planning what exactly?" I asked, already heading to my car. There was a long pause. "The key," Tom finally said. "It's to a safety deposit box at Boston First National Bank. That's where she's kept the original confession all these years, along with other evidence." "What other evidence?" I demanded, starting my car. "Photos," Tom said quietly, "of what George and his friends did to me, of what they tried to do to Nia, and of something else. Something even worse that happened a few weeks before we left Boston." My blood ran cold. "What happened, Tom?" "A young black man was lynched," Tom said, his voice barely above a whisper. "George and his friends did it. Nia saw it happen. She took pictures with a camera I'd given her for her birthday. She was going to take them to the police, but after what happened to us, she was too afraid. We just ran instead." I gripped the steering wheel tightly. "And now she's going to expose it all, after 70 years. "Yes," Tom confirmed. "But Jamie, Junior won't let that happen without a fight. He's built his whole life, his whole identity, on the lie that his father was a good man. If Nia exposes the truth," he didn't need to finish the thought. I understood perfectly. Junior had already shown he was willing to get violent to protect his father's legacy. What would he do when confronted with irrefutable evidence of his father's crimes? "I'm going after her," I said firmly. "I'll call you when I find her." The drive to Boston was a blur. I kept trying Nia's phone, but it went straight to voicemail every time. I tried Faith's number too, the one I'd called from the hospital, but got the same result. I could only hope I wasn't too late. When I reached Boston, I went straight to the bank Tom had mentioned. Inside, I approached the first teller I saw. "I'm looking for an elderly black woman," I said breathlessly. "She would have come in to access a safety deposit box within the last hour or so." The teller frowned. "I'm sorry, but we can't give out information about our customers." I was about to argue when I spotted them, Nia and Faith, walking out of a room marked private viewing. Nia was holding a large manila envelope, her expression grim but determined. Faith walked beside her, looking nervous but supportive. "Nia!" I called out, rushing toward them. They both turned, startled. Nia's eyes widened when she saw me. "Jamie, what are you doing here?" "Stopping you from making a terrible mistake," I said, reaching them. "Whatever you're planning to do with those photos, it's not worth the risk." Nia's expression hardened. "It's worth every risk. It's worth my life if necessary. But it's not just your life at stake," I argued. "Tom is worried sick about you, and Junior has already shown he's willing to get violent." Faith spoke up, her voice surprisingly gentle. "She's right, Nia. Maybe we should rethink this." I looked at Faith in surprise. This wasn't the bitter, hateful woman I'd seen at the hospital. This woman seemed genuinely concerned for her sister's welfare. Their relationship had clearly evolved since that first explosive reunion. Nia looked between us, clutching the envelope tightly. "I've waited 70 years for justice. I'm not waiting any longer. At least let me come with you," I pleaded. "Whatever you're planning to do, don't do it alone." Nia hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Fine, but you follow my lead." We left the bank together, Nia directing us to Faith's car. As we drove through the streets of Boston, Nia explained her plan. She was going to confront Junior at his home, show him the evidence of his father's crimes, and give him a choice. Publicly acknowledge what his father did and make amends, or she would take everything to the media. "He won't agree to that," I warned. "He'll try to take the evidence from you by force. That's why we're not actually bringing the originals," Faith said, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "What Nia has in that envelope are copies. The originals are safe." It was a smart precaution, but I still didn't like this plan. Confronting Junior in his own home seemed unnecessarily dangerous, but Nia was determined, and short of physically restraining a 93-year-old woman, there wasn't much I could do to stop her. We arrived at Junior's Victorian house, the same one I'd watched the day before. Faith parked across the street, and we sat for a moment, gathering our courage. "Are you sure about this?" Faith asked Nia, turning in her seat to face her sister. Nia nodded, her jaw set. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." We got out of the car and approached the house. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Nia walked with surprising steadiness, the envelope clutched tightly in her hands. Faith and I flanked her, ready to support her if needed. Nia rang the doorbell, and we waited. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened, revealing George Miller Jr. He was even more imposing up close, his cold eyes narrowing as he took in the three women on his doorstep. His gaze settled on Nia, and recognition dawned on his face. "You," he said, his voice a low growl. "You have some nerve coming here." "Hello, Junior," Nia said calmly. "It's been a long time. May we come in? We have something to discuss." Junior's eyes flicked to Faith, then to me, then back to Nia. For a moment, I thought he might slam the door in our faces, but then surprisingly, he stepped back. "5 minutes," he said curtly. "Then you leave, or I call the police." We followed him into a tastefully decorated living room. Junior remained standing, arms crossed over his chest, while we sat on an antique sofa. "Say what you came to say," he demanded. Nia opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of papers. "These are copies of your father's confession," she said, her voice steady. "Written the day before he unalived himself. It details everything he did, the attack on my husband, the break-in at our apartment, and the lynching of James Williams." Junior's face paled slightly at the mention of the lynching, but he quickly quickly recovered. More lies, he spat. My father was a good man, a respected member of this community. Your father was a violent racist who couldn't stand the thought of a black woman and a white man being together, Naya said bluntly. And when he couldn't break us apart, he tried to destroy us. She pulled out several photographs from the envelope. These are copies too, she said, laying them on the coffee table. The originals are in a safe place, along with instructions to release them to every major news outlet if anything happens to me, my husband, or my sister. Junior stared at the photos, his expression unreadable. I couldn't see what they showed from where I sat, but judging by the way his hands trembled slightly, they were as damning as Tom had suggested. What do you want? Junior finally asked, his voice tight. Acknowledgement, Nia said simply. A public statement admitting what your father did, a donation to the families of his victims, and a promise to leave us alone for whatever time we have left. Junior laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You expect me to destroy my father's legacy, my own reputation, based on some ancient photos and a supposed confession that could easily be forged? I expect you to do the right thing, Naya said firmly, something your father never did. Junior's expression darkened. Get out of my house, now before I throw you out. Nia gathered the photos and confession, returning them to the envelope. You have 24 hours to decide, she said, rising from the sofa with dignity. After that, these go public. As we turned to leave, Junior stepped forward, his face contorted with rage. You think you can threaten me? In my own home? He reached for the envelope. Give me those. I moved between them instinctively. Don't touch her. Junior's hand connected with my shoulder, shoving me aside. I stumbled, catching myself on the edge of a side table. Faith cried out in alarm, but Nia stood her ground, clutching the envelope to her chest. Is this how your father taught you to treat women? She asked, her voice cutting. With violence and intimidation? You really are his son? Something in her words seemed to reach Junior. He stepped back, his hands falling to his sides. 24 hours, he said, his voice cold. Then we'll see who the public believes. A respected community leader or a vindictive old woman with a grudge. We left quickly, not speaking until we were safely back in Faith's car. That was too close, Faith said, her hands shaking as she started the engine. He could have hurt you, Naya. He wouldn't dare, Nia said, but I could hear the slight tremor in her voice. Not with witnesses present. I leaned forward from the back seat. What happens now? Nia turned to look at me, her expression resolute. Now we wait. Either Junior does the right thing, or the world learns the truth about his father. As Faith drove us away from Junior's house, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Junior had too much to lose to simply give in to Nia's demands, and a cornered man, especially one with a history of violence, was dangerous. What had I gotten myself into? And more importantly, how was I going to keep Naya safe from whatever came next? We drove back to Maine in tense silence. Faith insisted on coming with us, saying she wasn't about to abandon her sister again. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Junior's car following us. Nia sat calmly in the passenger seat, the envelope of copies on her lap, staring straight ahead like she was mentally preparing for battle. What if he doesn't respond? I finally asked, breaking the silence somewhere around Portsmouth. He'll respond, Naya said with absolute certainty. Men like Junior can't stand to be challenged, especially by someone they consider beneath them. Faith nodded in agreement. Their whole identity is built on being superior. Take that away, and they crumble. I wasn't so sure. Junior hadn't seemed like the type to crumble under pressure. If anything, he'd seemed like the type to push back harder. We arrived at Pine Meadows just after dinner time. The staff was relieved to see Naya back safely, though they gave Faith curious looks. I guess they remembered her dramatic entrance at the hospital. I helped get Nia settled back in her temporary room while Faith went to find some food in the cafeteria. You should go home and rest, Nia told me, noticing the dark circles under my eyes. You've done enough for one day. I shook my head. I'm not leaving you alone tonight, not after what happened with Junior. Nia smiled, reaching out to pat my hand. You're a good girl, Jamie. Reminds me of myself at your age. Stubborn as a mule. I laughed despite my exhaustion. I'll take that as a compliment. I called the hospital to update Tom, who was relieved to hear we were all back safely. The doctors wanted to keep him another day or two before transferring him back to Pine Meadows for recovery. I promised to stay with Nia until he returned. That night, I slept in the empty bed in Nia's temporary room. Faith took the recliner, insisting she'd slept in worse places. I dozed fitfully, waking at every small noise, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What if Junior showed up here? What if he had friends in Maine? What if the police got involved and sided with him instead of Nia? Morning came with no word from Junior. Nia seemed unfazed, going about her usual routine with Faith's help. I had to work my regular shift, but I checked on them whenever I could. Around noon, Nia's phone rang. She answered it with Faith and me hovering anxiously nearby. Yes, this is she, Nia said, her voice steady. Then she listened for a long moment, her expression giving nothing away. I see. No, that won't do it all. It's all or nothing, Junior. Another pause. Nia's eyes narrowed slightly. You have until 6 p.m. After that, the envelope goes to the Boston Globe. She hung up without waiting for a response. What did he say? Faith asked immediately. He offered money, Nia said, disgust evident in her voice. As if that could erase what his father did, what he tried to do to me. I felt a chill run down my spine. Is he coming here? Nia shook her head. He wants to meet in Portland. Neutral ground, he said. You're not going, I said firmly. It's too dangerous. I have to go, Nia replied, equally firm. This ends today, one way or another. I looked to Faith for support, but she just shrugged. Once Nia makes up her mind, there's no changing it. Trust me, I've tried for 90 years. I sighed in defeat. Fine, but I'm coming with you, and we're bringing security. Nia raised an eyebrow. Security? I nodded. I know just the person. During my lunch break, I tracked down Joseph. He wasn't exactly intimidating at first glance, lanky with glasses and a nervous energy, but he'd mentioned being a black belt in karate. Plus, he was the only staff member I trusted completely. You want me to what? Joseph asked when I explained the situation. Just come with us to Portland. I said. Be an extra pair of eyes. Make sure Junior doesn't try anything. Joseph ran a hand through his hair. This sounds really sketchy, Jamie. Shouldn't we call the police? And tell them what? That a 93-year-old woman is meeting someone to discuss historical evidence of racism? They'll laugh us off the phone. I sighed. Look, I know it's a lot to ask, but Nia needs our help. Joseph thought for a moment, then nodded. Okay, I'm in. But if things get weird, I'm calling 911. Deal, I agreed, relieved to have another ally. The rest of my shift crawled by. I kept checking the time, my anxiety growing as 6 p.m. approached. Finally, at 5, I clocked out and went to help Nia and Faith get ready. Joseph met us in the parking lot looking nervous but determined. Portland's about an hour away, I said, checking my watch. We should leave now to make sure we're not late. The drive to Portland was tense. Nia sat in the front seat next to me, the envelope of copies clutched tightly in her hands. Faith and Joseph were in the back, both looking out the windows as if expecting trouble from any direction. Junior had chosen a small coffee shop in downtown Portland for the meeting. It was public enough to prevent any obvious violence, but quiet enough for a private conversation. Smart. We arrived 15 minutes early and chose a table in the corner with a clear view of the door. Joseph positioned himself at a nearby table, pretending to read a newspaper while keeping an eye on the entrance. Faith ordered coffees for everyone, though none of us felt much like drinking. At exactly 6 p.m., the door opened and Junior walked in. He was alone, dressed in an expensive suit that looked out of place in the casual coffee shop. His eyes scanned the room, landing on our table. His mouth tightened into a thin line as he approached. Mrs. Johnson, he said stiffly, nodding to Nia. He glanced at Faith and me with barely concealed disdain before pulling out a chair and sitting down. Junior, Nia replied, her voice cool. I see you came alone. As agreed, he said. Though I see you brought your entourage. Nia smiled thinly. Insurance. Junior placed a briefcase on the table and clicked it open. Inside was a stack of papers and what looked like a checkbook. I've prepared a statement, he said, sliding a document across the table, acknowledging my father's indiscretions, and I'm prepared to make a substantial donation to a charity of your choice. Nia picked up the statement and read it slowly, her expression darkening with each line. When she finished, she placed it back on the table. This isn't what we discussed, she said flatly. This says your father had regrettable racial attitudes common to his time. It says nothing about the attack on my husband, nothing about the break-in at our apartment, and certainly nothing about James Williams. Junior's jaw tightened. You're asking me to destroy my father's legacy, to admit he was a murderer. I'm asking you to tell the truth, Nia corrected. Something your family has avoided for 70 years. Junior leaned forward, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Do you have any idea what this would do to me? To my reputation? Everything I've built would be gone overnight. And that matters more than justice for James Williams? For Tom? For me? Nia's voice remained steady, but I could see the anger in her eyes. Junior sat back, running a hand over his face. For a moment, he looked older, tired. What if I doubled the donation? Made it anonymous, of course. Nia shook her head. It's not about money. It never was. Then what do you want? Junior demanded, frustration evident in his voice. I told you. Acknowledgement. The truth. A real apology. Not this sanitized version of history. Nia tapped the statement with one finger. Rewrite it. Include everything. Or the photos go public tomorrow morning. Junior stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he lunged across the table, grabbing for the envelope that sat beside Nia's untouched coffee. I reacted instinctively, knocking his arm away. Coffee spilled across the table as Junior's hand caught the edge of the envelope, tearing it open. Photos and papers scattered across the wet surface. Joseph was at our table in an instant, pulling Junior back. The few other customers in the shop turned to stare at the commotion. Let go of me, Junior snarled, trying to shake off Joseph's grip. Not until you calm down, Joseph replied firmly. Junior stopped struggling, his eyes fixed on the scattered photos. One in particular seemed to capture his attention, a black and white image partially visible beneath a coffee-stained paper. I couldn't see it clearly, but whatever it showed made Junior's face drain of color. That can't be real, he muttered. Nia carefully picked up the photo, wiping away the coffee with a napkin. Your father, George Miller Sr., standing over the body of James Williams, August 17th, 1949. I took this picture from behind a tree. I was supposed to meet Tom there, but I was running late. Instead, I witnessed a murder. Junior sank back into his chair, the fight gradually leaving him. Joseph cautiously released his grip, but remained standing nearby, ready to intervene again if necessary. My father always said he was a good man, Junior said, his voice quieter now. That people misunderstood him, that he was protecting our community. Is that what you call lynching an innocent man? Protection? Faith asked, speaking up for the first time. Her voice was sharp with decades of suppressed anger. Junior looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. You knew about this? Faith nodded. I found the confession after he died, read every word of it. That's why I kept it all these years. Insurance in case you ever turned out like him. And did I? Junior asked, his voice barely audible. Turn out like him? No one answered immediately. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Nia finally spoke. You have his temper, she said honestly, his pride, his stubbornness. But no, Junior, you haven't called anyone. You haven't tried to rope anyone. You're not your father. She paused, then added, not yet, anyway. Junior flinched at her blunt words. He stared at the scattered photos and papers, at the evidence of his father's crimes that he'd spent a lifetime denying. Then slowly, he reached for the statement he'd brought. I'll rewrite it, he said, his voice subdued but not entirely surrendered. The full truth. But I need time. Nia studied him for a moment, then nodded. 1 week. and I want to approve the final version before it's released. Junior agreed, though with visible reluctance, and we spent the next hour working out the details. He would write a complete statement acknowledging his father's crimes. He would make financial restitution to James Williams's surviving family, if they could be found, and he would publicly apologize to Tom and Nia for his father's actions and his own recent behavior. In return, Nia would not release the photos or confession to the media. They would be donated to a historical archive after Junior's death, ensuring the truth would be preserved without destroying his life completely. It wasn't perfect justice. Nothing could be after 70 years, but it was something. A recognition of wrongs done, an acknowledgement of suffering caused, a step, however small, toward healing. As we prepared to leave, Junior stopped Nia with a hesitant touch on her arm. "I am sorry," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "for what my father did, for what I tried to do. You deserved better." Nia looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Yes, we did." The drive back to Pine Meadows was quieter than the trip out, but less tense. Nia sat with the torn envelope in her lap, looking out the window at the darkening Maine landscape. "Do you think he'll keep his word?" I asked, breaking the silence. "He will," Faith said from the back seat. "He's afraid not to." Joseph, who'd insisted on coming back with us just in case, nodded in agreement. "Did you see his face when he saw that photo? That was real shock. I don't think he knew the truth until today." Nia sighed, sounding suddenly very tired. "Sometimes I think that's the worst crime of all. Letting your children believe a lie, making them complicit in your sins without their knowledge." I glanced at her, surprised by the philosophical turn. "At least now he knows. He can choose to be better." "Yes," Nia agreed. "That's all any of us can do, really. Choose to be better than those who came before us." When we arrived back at Pine Meadows, I helped Nia to her room while Faith and Joseph went to find some dinner. The events of the day had clearly exhausted her, though she tried not to show it. "You should rest," I said, helping her into bed. "It's been a long day." Nia nodded, settling against the pillows. "Jamie," she said as I turned to leave, "thank you for believing me, for helping me. Not many would have." I smiled. That's what friends do. The next morning, Tom returned from the hospital, his hip heavily bandaged but his spirits elevated. He was wheeled directly to Nia's room, where Faith was helping her sister dress. "Well, look at you two," Tom said, grinning at the sight of the sisters together. "Never thought I'd see the day." Faith rolled her eyes, but there was no real annoyance in the gesture. Someone has to make sure she doesn't get into more trouble. I watched from the doorway as Tom took Nia's hand, his eyes full of questions. Nia told him everything. The confrontation with Junior, the agreement they'd reached, the promise of a public acknowledgement. "Do you think it's enough?" Tom asked when she finished. "After all these years?" Nia considered the question. "It's not everything I wanted, but it's more than I ever thought we'd get." She squeezed his hand. "And we're still here, Tom. Still together. That's the real victory." Over the next week, life at Pine Meadows gradually returned to normal. Nia moved back into her repaired room, with Tom in a bed nearby while his hip healed. Faith decided to stay in town for a while, renting a small apartment and visiting daily. Junior kept his word. 7 days after our meeting, a thick envelope arrived for Nia. Inside was a detailed statement acknowledging everything: the attack on Tom, the break-in at their apartment, his father's involvement in James Williams's lynching. It was painful to read, unflinching in its honesty. Junior had also included proof of a substantial donation to the NAACP in James Williams's name. The statement was published in the Boston Globe the following Sunday. It caused exactly the stir you'd expect: shock, outrage, calls for further investigation into other unsolved crimes from that era. Junior resigned from his positions in various community organizations, citing health concerns. The last I heard, he was selling his house in Boston and moving to Florida. As for Nia and Tom, they became minor celebrities at Pine Meadows. The other residents treated them with a new respect, especially after a local reporter came to interview them about Junior's statement. Even Grumpy Richard from room 212 started joining them for card games in the common room. Faith extended her stay indefinitely, eventually moving into a retirement community just down the road from Pine Meadows. She and Nia had a lot of lost time to make up for, and they seemed determined to do just that. One afternoon, about a month after everything happened, I found Nia, Tom, and Faith sitting in the garden, enjoying the late summer sunshine. Nia was telling a story, her hands gesturing animatedly while Tom and Faith laughed. "Jamie," Nia called when she spotted me. "Come join us. I was just telling them about the time you pretended to be Nigerian to trick Faith into visiting me." I blushed, taking the empty chair beside Tom. Not my finest moment. "Oh, I don't know," Faith said with a wry smile. "Your accent was terrible, but your heart was in the right place." We all laughed, and for a moment it was easy to forget everything that had happened. The fear, the confrontations, the decades of pain and injustice. In that moment, they were just 3 elderly people enjoying each other's company, and I was lucky enough to be included. "So what happens now?" I asked during a lull in the conversation. "With the original photos and confession, I mean. They're safe," Nia said, "in a place where they'll be preserved but not publicized. At least not until after Junior is gone." She reached for Tom's hand. "Some truths need to be told. Others, well, sometimes mercy is as important as justice." Tom nodded in agreement. We got what we needed: acknowledgement, an apology, the chance to finally put the past to rest, and a sister back. Faith added quietly, reaching for Nia's other hand. Nia smiled, looking more at peace than I'd ever seen her. Yes, that most of all. Later that evening, as I was finishing my shift, I stopped by their room one last time. Nia was asleep, but Tom was still awake, reading by the soft light of a bedside lamp. "Everything okay?" I asked softly, not wanting to wake Nia. Tom nodded, setting his book aside. "Better than okay." He glanced at his sleeping wife, his expression tender. "You know, when we first got married, people said it wouldn't last 6 months. Too many obstacles, too much hatred against us. 75 years later and you proved them all wrong," I said, smiling. "We did," Tom agreed, "because loving her was always worth it. Every hardship, every sacrifice, every moment of fear or doubt, worth it." I thought about everything they'd been through, the family rejection, the threats, the violence, the decades of hiding their past. And still, they'd found joy together, built a life filled with love despite it all. I should let you rest, I said, turning to go. Jamie, Tom called softly. I paused in the doorway. Don't settle. Find someone who makes every struggle worthwhile. I nodded, thinking of Morgan from physical therapy with his wandering eyes and empty conversations, of Dr. Patel, who'd apparently moved to Boston, of all the compromises I'd made in my own relationships. I won't, I promised. And for the first time, I really meant it. As I walked down the hallway of Pine Meadows, past rooms filled with people nearing the end of their journeys, I thought about Nia and Tom, about 75 years of choosing each other day after day, through hardships I could barely imagine. About Faith, finding her way back to her sister after 7 decades of separation. About Junior, finally facing the truth about his father and choosing a different path. It wasn't a perfect ending. Justice delayed is justice denied after all. But it was something. A recognition of wrongs done. A step toward healing. And sometimes, that's the best we can hope for. The next morning, I brought Nia an extra pudding cup from the kitchen, just like I used to before all this started. She was sitting up in bed, writing in a new notebook while Tom dozed beside her. What are you working on? I asked, setting the pudding on her tray. Nia smiled, that warm smile that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. Our story, the real one, from beginning to end, for whoever might need to hear it someday. I nodded, understanding completely. Some stories need to be told, even if it takes 75 years to find the right words.